Hey everybody! Today I want to talk to you about food dehydration. Now, I've already done a video explaining how to pick the best food dehydrator for you, and I'll put a link to that in the description. But this video is going to be just showing you the very easy, simple steps that you need to take when you're dehydrating food at home. I do use an electric food dehydrator, this Nesco here, and there's another one here behind me as well. And the reason for that is simply if I tried to use solar dehydration outside, the sun, right? The food would take a really long time to dry given where I live, and I would risk not only the food spoiling, but the quality just isn't going to be that great, including the nutritional value. So the faster the food dries without cooking it, the better the quality the food you have. So I'm just going to take you step by step. I've got a big bowl of oregano I picked from my garden, and I'm going to show you how I dehydrate it at home. So the big question is always, when is it really dry? Now, I think with herbs, it's fairly easy to tell because the leaves are going to be crunchy. They're very crunchy. With other things, let's say you have some sliced fruit. I would tear it apart, tear a piece apart, and squeeze, and if there's any sign of moisture at all, put it back in. And let me just show you how I like to do herbs. You notice I dry it on the stem. That's just because it's easier. And then I just strip the stems. By the way, some people ask about spacing. You'll notice I just sort of piled this herb onto the trays. That works fine usually with herbs. With fruit or vegetables, jerky, you're going to want things to be in a single layer and not touching. Otherwise they can end up sticking to each other. And it's perfectly fine that the stem itself isn't dry. We don't expect it to be dry because it's so much thicker. Okay, I just do that with each tray. And when I'm done, I'm going to let the contents cool before I put the lid on. Because if I don't, it could create steam which of course is going to cause moisture, which is going to make the food not last as long. So now that you've seen me dehydrate some herbs, I want to talk to you about some basic rules that are going to make it so you can dehydrate anything that can be safely dehydrated at home. So the first thing to know is what you can and cannot dehydrate. So fruit, vegetables, herbs, seeds, and jerky, all safe to dry at home. But anything that's fatty is going to go rancid really fast. So that could include things like fatty meat, like you're not going to do bacon jerky, or eggs, nuts. You also have to be a little bit careful with fish. You can dehydrate it and make fish jerky. However, it's going to have a tendency to go bad, so you're going to want to store it in your refrigerator and eat it soon, or in your freezer. And you certainly may also dehydrate pork. But even with wild pork and with factory farm raised pork, there is a concern about certain bad bugs and parasites. So there are a few extra steps you have to take. I'm not going to get into that today. I am going to put a link in the description though, so that if you're curious, you can go look that up. And if you're on your TV or something, you can Google it later. The goal here is always to make the food last at least a year. And we do that by keeping it in a cool, dry, dark location. So if for any reason you say it gets hot in your pantry, or it's really humid in your house, or you decide to store it out on open shelves where the food is exposed to light, all those things are going to reduce the length of time the food will last, and also it affects the quality. So ideally, again, your dehydrated food should last at least a year. Another important thing to bear in mind is what temperature you dehydrate your food at. And that might seem silly, since just using the sun is the original way to make dehydrated food. But the fact of the matter is that if you have it at the wrong temperature, your food isn't going to taste as good, it's not going to be as nutritious, and it's not going to last as long. So this is why I highly recommend that you have a dehydrator that has a temperature control setting on it. This one goes from 160 degrees all the way down to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm just going to read off to you here the temperatures that are recommended. These are very standard. So if you have herbs, you're going to do that at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Seeds are 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Fruits and veggies are 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And the highest temperature is 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's what you're going to make your jerky in, and that's going to make it safe. Okay, it's confession time. There's something I don't do that you're supposed to do when it comes to dehydrating food. And that is, once it's dry and you put it in the jar and it's cooled off and you put the lid on, you're supposed to condition it. And all that means is once a day, at least once a day, maybe twice a day, you take the jar out, you shake it, you open it up, you check for moisture. And you might do that for a week. I have never ever done that in all my years of dehydrating. And I think the reason my food is still okay is that I just make sure that it's truly dry before I stick it into storage. And if you are using an airtight jar, there should be no humidity or moisture getting into that jar. So if you're just starting out, it is a good idea to condition your product and make sure that it is truly dry. But once you have the hang of it, I don't really think it's necessary. I do also want to touch upon a subject that is kind of a pet peeve of mine. A lot of times in books or maybe articles that you see on the web, you'll see that it takes X number of minutes or hours to dry whatever, apple slices, for example. Nobody can tell you how long it's going to take to dry anything. Nobody can even really give you a ballpark figure. And the reason for that is there are just too many variables. So things that affect the drying time include how fresh is the produce that you're drying. So older produce is naturally drier. Just picked produce is much more moist. The variety that you are drying. For example, we have some apples that are naturally just more dry when you pick it right off the tree, and others that are super juicy. So obviously the super juicy ones are going to take longer to dry than the drier ones. The thickness. Now, you know, a lot of books and so forth give you a ballpark idea of how thick to slice things, but any little variation can make a big difference in drying time. How crowded things are. You'll notice when I did the oregano, I really crowded it in, and I did a lot. I have a lot of trays going. Right now I only have a few, but there's a lot of trays stacked on my food dehydrator. That makes it just take longer to dry. If I did 4 trays, it would go much faster, but I'd have to do more loads. So I just prefer to do it this way. Also, another biggie is the humidity and the temperature, especially the humidity, in your home or wherever you're dehydrating the food. If it's very humid in your area, it's going to take a lot longer to dry something than if you live in an arid area. Anyway, I think I've covered all the basics of how to dehydrate. It really is that simple. One of the easiest ways to preserve food. I do have an article on my blog that has everything that I've just said and probably a little bit more, all written out, all the temperatures that you want to use when you're dehydrating. I'll put a link to that in the description. If you do like this video, I hope you'll share it. I hope you'll subscribe. And if you have any questions at all, please leave a comment. I'm just doing this to help people, so please feel free to ask questions. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.